Every regime, no matter how absolute, has an expiration date, not necessarily the regime itself, but the man at its center, the figure around whom an entire system of power, mythology, and fear has been constructed. The person whose face appears on every wall, whose name is spoken with practiced reverence, and whose decisions determine whether 25 million people eat or go hungry. Kim Jong-un is 42 years old. He smokes heavily. He drinks. He sleeps little. The cardiovascular problems that contributed to the deaths of both his father and his grandfather have, according to South Korean intelligence reports, already begun to manifest in him as well. The question of what happens when he is gone is not hypothetical. It is, by most serious assessments, a matter of timing. And that question, who or what survives the transition, may be the most consequential political uncertainty on the planet right now. Since 2022, something has shifted inside North Korea's carefully controlled public image. A child began appearing at Kim Jong-un's side, at missile tests, at military parades, at state banquets surrounded by the country's highest-ranking generals. A girl estimated to be around 12 or 13 years old, dressed in outfits that mirror her father's, positioned with a deliberateness that analysts across the world have not been able to ignore. Her name, according to former NBA player Dennis Rodman, one of the few Westerners ever granted access to the Kim family's private life, is Kim Ju. She has never been officially confirmed by the North Korean state, and yet she keeps appearing. Closer to the center each time. What we are witnessing may be the early stages of a succession plan inside one of the most opaque governments in modern history, or it may be something else entirely. A calculated image strategy, a projection of dynasty, a father using his daughter to consolidate his own legitimacy at a moment when his grip on power faces pressure from multiple directions. The honest answer is that no one outside Pyongyang knows for certain. What we do know is this: when Kim Jong-un eventually leaves, however that happens, whenever that happens, not everything he has built is guaranteed to survive him. This is inside locked doors. North Korea does not have a government in the conventional sense of the word. It has a mythology. The distinction matters. Governments derive authority from institutions, constitutions, elections, bureaucratic structures that exist independently of any single individual. Mythologies derive authority from something else entirely, from the idea that the person at the center of power is not merely a leader, but something closer to a divine force, unchallengeable, inevitable, permanent. The Kim dynasty has spent more than 7 decades constructing exactly that kind of mythology. It began with Kim Il-sung, the founder of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, who consolidated power after the Korean War and built a system of governance so thoroughly centered on his own person that the state and the man became, for practical purposes, indistinguishable. When he died in 1994, North Korea did not simply mourn a leader. Why, it mourned something closer to a cosmological event. The state media described a world thrown into disorder by his absence. Mountains allegedly wept. Weather patterns were attributed to grief. His son, Kim Jong-il, inherited not just power, but an entire apparatus of veneration. The transition was not seamless. It took 3 years before Kim Jong-il was formally confirmed as the country's supreme leader, a period during which North Korea experienced one of the worst famines in its history, killing an estimated 600,000 to 1 million people. The regime's response was not reform, it was intensification. The cult of personality surrounding the Kim family grew more elaborate, more pervasive, and more deeply embedded in every institution of North Korean society. By the time Kim Jong-un assumed power in 2011, following his father's death, the architecture of deification was already fully constructed. His task was not to build it, it was to inhabit it convincingly. He was approximately 27 years old. He had been introduced to the North Korean public only 1 year prior, appointed as a general with no visible military career to justify the rank. To the outside world, he appeared to be a young man being handed an impossible inheritance. To North Korea's internal propaganda apparatus, he was the natural continuation of a bloodline that the state had spent decades teaching its citizens to regard as sacred. What followed was a consolidation of power that was swift, deliberate, and at times brutal. Kim Jong-un moved against senior generals who might have challenged his authority. He removed figures from his own family who represented alternative centers of power. His uncle, a Yang Song-thaek, once considered one of the most influential men in North Korea, was executed in 2013. The message was clear, and it was intended to be. The new leader was not a figurehead. He was not a transitional figure. He was the continuation of a dynasty, and he intended to remain so. Understanding this history is essential to understanding what is happening in North Korea today. Because the system Kim Jong-un inherited and reinforced is one in which the state's legitimacy is not institutional. It is personal. The authority of the North Korean government does not flow from a constitution or a party structure that exists independently of the Kim family. It flows from the Kim family itself, from the idea constructed over generations and enforced through a combination of propaganda, surveillance, and state violence, and that the Kims are not ordinary political leaders, but something qualitatively different, something that cannot simply be replaced by a competent administrator or a capable general. This creates a structural problem that no amount of ideology can fully resolve. Every human being is mortal. Every mythology, no matter how carefully maintained, eventually collides with biological reality. Kim Il-sung died, Kim Jong-il died, and Kim Jong-un, despite the carefully managed image of invincibility that surrounds him, will also die. The question the regime has never been able to answer cleanly, and the question that now hangs over every public appearance of Kim Jong-un and his daughter, is what happens to a mythology when the person at its center is gone. The Kim dynasty has navigated this question twice before. Each transition carried risk. On each one required a period of internal consolidation, during which the regime was, by definition, more vulnerable than usual. The first transition, from Kim Il-sung to Kim Jong-il, coincided with a famine that killed hundreds of thousands. The second, from Kim Jong-il to Kim Jong-un, required the new leader to execute members of his own family to secure his position. There is no reason to assume the third will be simpler, and there is considerable evidence to suggest it may be the most complicated of all. In most countries, the health of a head of state is a matter of public record, or at least of reasonable public speculation. Medical disclosures, scheduled appearances, visible changes in physical condition, these details circulate, get analyzed, and inform how governments and markets respond to uncertainty about leadership continuity. North Korea operates differently. The health of Kim Jong-un is a state secret, not in the informal sense that many governments protect the medical privacy of their leaders, but in the structural sense that any unauthorized discussion of the subject inside North Korea constitutes a potentially prosecutable act. The regime's information apparatus controls what is known, what is seen, and what is permitted to be inferred. And yet the body tells its own story. Analysts who study North Korean state media have spent years tracking Kim Jong-un's physical appearance through official photographs, state television broadcasts, and the rare footage that emerges from official events. What they have documented over the past decade is a man whose weight has increased substantially, whose face shows visible signs of cardiovascular stress, and whose public schedule has, on multiple occasions, gone dark for weeks at a time without explanation. In 2020, Kim Jong-un disappeared from public view for approximately 3 weeks. The speculation was immediate and global. South Korean intelligence officials stated they had no confirmed information about his condition. Chinese medical teams were reportedly dispatched to Pyongyang. Various news outlets published conflicting reports ranging from routine medical recovery to critical cardiac surgery. When Kim Jong-un reappeared, he was visibly thinner, walking with what some analysts described as a slight limp. No official explanation was provided. The episode illustrated something important. In a system built around the invincibility of a single figure, any visible sign of physical vulnerability becomes a political event. The regime cannot acknowledge illness without undermining the mythology it depends on, and yet it cannot hide physical reality indefinitely. The result is a permanent tension between the image the state projects and the biological reality that image is designed to obscure. South Korea's National Intelligence Service has been direct about its assessment. According to NIS reports, Kim Jong-un maintains what they describe as a significantly unhealthy lifestyle: heavy alcohol consumption, chronic sleep deprivation, a diet that, combined with his weight, places substantial strain on his cardiovascular system. He is, by all observable indicators, a chain smoker. These are not minor risk factors. They are the same constellation of health problems that contributed to the deaths of both his father, Kim Jong-il, who died of a heart attack in 2011, and his grandfather, Kim Il-sung, who died of a heart attack in 1994. The pattern is not coincidental. It reflects something about the culture of the Kim inner circle: the all-night drinking sessions, the high-pressure banquets, the lifestyle of a man who has operated under the particular kind of stress that comes with being both the absolute ruler of a heavily sanctioned state and the central figure of a mythology that demands he appear simultaneously omnipotent and approachable. A 2023 report by the New York Times, drawing on intelligence assessments and medical analysis, concluded that Kim Jong-un is likely already experiencing cardiovascular complications. The report noted that his age, he is currently 42, does not provide the buffer that might otherwise exist. Cardiovascular disease does not follow a predictable schedule. What makes this significant beyond the personal is the structural reality it creates. North Korea has no publicly acknowledged succession mechanism. There is no vice president. There is no constitutionally defined line of succession that would activate automatically in the event of the leader's incapacitation or death. The regime's entire architecture of legitimacy is concentrated in a single person, and that person is showing visible signs of the same health trajectory that ended the lives of his two predecessors. This is the context in which Kim Joo began appearing in public. It would be reductive to conclude that her appearances are solely a response to her father's health concerns. The calculus is almost certainly more complex than that, but it would be equally reductive to ignore the timing. Kim Jong-un began placing his daughter in the public frame at precisely the moment when questions about his own longevity were becoming harder for outside observers to dismiss. Whether that is deliberate succession planning, image management, or some combination of the two, the effect is the same. For the first time in the history of the Kim dynasty, the question of what comes next has a visible, if unconfirmed, answer, standing in official photographs alongside the supreme leader. That answer is approximately 12 years old, and the weight of what she may be inheriting is, by any measure, considerable. In November 2022, North Korean state media released footage of a ballistic missile test. The missile in question was the Hwasong-17, one of the largest intercontinental ballistic missiles ever publicly displayed by any nation. With a stated maximum range of 15,000 kilometers, it is theoretically capable of reaching the continental United States. The test was staged with the kind of precise visual choreography that North Korean state media consistently applies to military events. Controlled camera angles, deliberate framing, a carefully managed portrait of national strength. But the international press, when it picked up the footage, largely fixated on something else. Standing next to Kim Jong-un, dressed casually as though attending a family outing, rather than the test launch of a weapon of mass destruction, was a young girl. Sure, she was holding her father's hand. No one had seen her before. No official announcement accompanied her appearance. North Korean state media did not name her or explain her presence. She was simply there, in the frame, beside the most powerful man in one of the world's most closed societies. The images circulated globally within hours. Her identity was pieced together through a combination of sources. Dennis Rodman, the former NBA player who has maintained an unusual personal friendship with Kim Jong-un since 2013, had mentioned during a 2013 interview with The Guardian that Kim had a baby daughter. He claimed to have held her. He named her Kim Joo. South Korea's National Intelligence Service had, in a 2017 report, confirmed the existence of at least two of Kim Jong-un's children, a daughter born in 2013 and a son born in 2010. Though the son has never appeared in public and the NIS has since raised questions about whether he exists at all, the girl in the November 2022 footage matched the approximate age of the daughter referenced in the NIS report. What followed her first appearance was not a one-time event. It was a pattern. February 2023, a banquet marking the 75th anniversary of the Korean People's Army. Official photographs from the event show Kim Joo seated between her parents, directly in front of North Korea's highest-ranking military generals. The composition of the image is striking. In a political culture where Kim Jong-un is treated as a figure of near-divine authority, the framing places his daughter in a position of visual prominence that analysts found difficult to interpret as accidental. Later that same month, got a massive military parade in Pyongyang's Kim Il-sung Square. Kim Joo stands at her father's side through the entire event. She watches as the Hwasong-17 rolls past on its transport vehicle. A white horse gallops through the parade grounds. The state television anchor describes it, without elaboration, as the horse most loved by the leader's beloved child. The detail is small. The implication, in a country where white horses carry deep symbolic significance within the Kim dynasty's mythology, is not. By 2023, she was photographed standing in front of her father, not beside him, in front of him, during the launch of North Korea's first spy satellite. The New York Times noted that it was the first time Kim Jong-un had been visually relegated to a secondary position in an official state portrait. The black leather outfit she wore that day is typically associated with the North Korean Air Force, and outside military contexts is worn exclusively by high-ranking officials. Japan-based media outlet Nikkei Asia conducted an analysis of more than 14,000 hours of North Korean state television broadcasts between 2022 and late 2025. Their findings were notable. The number of days Kim Joo appeared on state television began rising sharply in 2024. By the time of the analysis, her on-screen presence was approaching that of her father. More than half of her documented public appearances were at military-related events. In recent years, she has also been present at diplomatic meetings, including a 2025 trip to Beijing, where Kim Jong-un met with Chinese President Xi Jinping and Russian President Vladimir Putin. North Korean expert Jae-woo Park, who has spoken directly with both Dennis Rodman and individuals who were guests of Kim Jong-un in North Korea, offers a measured but pointed observation. No one in Kim Jong-un's immediate circle, he notes, is permitted the kind of physical proximity to the supreme leader that Kim Joo routinely displays. Not his generals, not his ministers, not, by observable measure, even his wife. The cheek-to-cheek posture, the whispered exchanges, the held hands in front of weapons capable of killing millions. These are not the behaviors of a child who happens to accompany her father to work. They are the behaviors of someone who has been placed, deliberately, in a specific relationship to power. State media have begun referring to Kim Joo using titles that carry unmistakable symbolic weight. Respected daughter, general, morning star. Each of these terms exists within a specific tradition of North Korean honorific language. Morning star, in particular, has historical resonance within the dynasty's own mythology. These are not casual designations. In a system where language is as precisely controlled as any other instrument of state, the words used to describe Kim Joo in official media are a form of political statement. Whether that statement constitutes a formal succession announcement is a separate question. Analysts are divided. Some argue that Kim Jong-un is using his daughter primarily as a tool of domestic image management, presenting himself as a family man at a moment when economic pressure and post-COVID isolation have strained the regime's relationship with its own population. Others point to the consistency and escalating formality of her appearances as evidence of something more deliberate and longer term. What is not in dispute is that a child who did not exist in the public record 3 years ago is now one of the most visible figures in North Korean state media, and that the regime, which controls every image, every title, and every frame of footage released to the public, has chosen, repeatedly and with increasing visibility, to place her at the center of the picture. The history of authoritarian succession is, in large part, a history of things that do not survive the transition. Sometimes it is the regime itself. The death of a strong man can expose the contradictions that his personal authority had been suppressing. Factional conflicts within the elite, in economic grievances within the population, regional tensions that were held in check by fear rather than resolved by policy. Without the centralizing force of a single undisputed leader, these pressures can move quickly toward destabilization. Sometimes the regime survives, but the mythology does not. The system continues to function, but the particular form of legitimacy that animated it, the idea that the leader was something more than human, cannot be transferred intact to a successor. What replaces it is often a more transactional, more openly coercive form of power, more fragile in different ways, and sometimes in systems built as thoroughly around a single bloodline as North Korea has been. Not the question is not whether the regime survives, but whether the specific individual chosen to carry it forward is capable of bearing that weight. Kim Joo is, by current estimates, somewhere between 12 and 13 years old. The gap between where she is now and where she would need to be to function as a credible head of state is not merely a matter of years. It is a matter of institutional positioning, elite loyalty, ideological preparation, and the kind of authority that can only be accumulated through a sustained and visible presence within the regime's power structure. Kim Jong-un himself, when he assumed power at approximately 27, had to execute members of his own family to consolidate his position. He had the advantage of being an adult and of having spent at least some years being groomed within the inner circle before his father's death. Kim Joo has none of those advantages yet. North Korea analysts and expert communities have identified several specific vulnerabilities in any succession scenario involving her. The first is timing. If Kim Jong-un's health deteriorates faster than his succession preparation can keep pace with, Kim Joo could find herself in a position of nominal authority without the institutional infrastructure to exercise it. In that scenario, real power would almost certainly migrate to other figures: senior party officials, military commanders, or most plausibly, Kim Jong-un's sister, Kim Yo-jong. Kim Yo-jong is already considered one of the most powerful individuals in North Korea. So she serves as vice director of the propaganda and agitation department and functions as the regime's primary voice in foreign policy. She appears at her brother's side during meetings with foreign heads of state. She is, by any functional assessment, the second most powerful person in the country. The NIS has listed her as a potential successor in her own right. If Kim Jong-un were to die or become incapacitated before Kim Joo reaches an age and position from which she could plausibly assert authority, Kim Yo-jong would represent the most immediate alternative center of power. The complication is structural. North Korea's succession tradition is built around direct bloodline transfer. The legitimacy of the Kim dynasty derives in significant part from the idea that power passes from father to child, that the bloodline itself carries a kind of inherited authority. Selecting a sibling rather than a child would represent a deviation from that logic, one that could invite challenges from other elite factions who might use the break in tradition to justify their own claims. Selecting the daughter preserves the bloodline logic, but it introduces a different set of complications. North Korea is, by any empirical measure, a deeply patriarchal society. Women are structurally underrepresented at every level of political and military leadership. The idea of a female supreme leader would have been, until very recently, practically inconceivable within the regime's own ideological framework. Kim Yo-jong's rise has begun to shift that calculus, but her authority derives from her proximity to her brother rather than from any formal legitimation of female leadership as a principle. There is also the question of the dynasty's name. In North Korea, children inherit their father's surname. If Kim Joo becomes supreme leader and has children, those children will carry her husband's surname, not Kim. The Kim dynasty, which has defined the North Korean state for 3 generations, would end with her. Kim Jong-un has the absolute authority to change that rule. Whether he will or whether the elite would accept such a change is unknown. What is known is that the regime is operating with an awareness of these questions that it has never previously displayed so openly. The deliberate escalating visibility of Kim Joo is not the behavior of a government that believes it has unlimited time. It is the behavior of a system that is, however carefully, beginning to prepare for a future it cannot fully control. The broader implications extend beyond the Korean peninsula. North Korea's nuclear program, its military posture, and its relationships with China and Russia are all, in varying degrees, products of Kim Jong-un's specific leadership decisions. A transition, whether orderly or chaotic, to Kim Joo or to some other configuration of power, would introduce variables into that equation that neighboring governments in the United States have been modeling and preparing for with increasing urgency. South Korea lives with the possibility of North Korean instability as a permanent feature of its security environment. Japan maintains it as a core driver of its defense policy. China, in which shares a border with North Korea and has historically served as the regime's primary economic lifeline, has its own calculations about how much instability it is willing to absorb. None of these external actors can control what happens inside Pyongyang when Kim Jong-un is no longer there to be the center of the system he has built. A girl in a black leather jacket, standing in front of her father in an official photograph, may be the closest thing to an answer that the regime is currently prepared to offer. Whether that answer will be sufficient, whether it will survive the transition it is being prepared for, is the question that no amount of state television footage, no number of carefully staged military parades, and no volume of honorific titles can definitively resolve. The mythology was built to last forever. Why, the man at its center was not. And the distance between those two facts is where the future of North Korea currently lives.